I don't allow the barbarian at my Dungeons & Dragons table, and I know that it's a very controversial opinion. However, hear me out before you judge. Semi-frequently, there will be new players that come into my games, or whenever I start a new game, there will be a new player. And the class that they always go towards immediately is the barbarian. And I understand why. The barbarian is a very appealing class at first. You have the most amount of hit points at level 1. You're doing big damage. You don't have to worry about magic or many mechanics like magic or more complicated mechanics. Your character basically has two things that they need to keep track of to be a successful character: rage and find the most powerful weapon as possible. Now, I'm not going to deny the usefulness of a barbarian in the party, especially if your party is low level, like 1 or 2. Then yes, a class like the barbarian is pretty much essential to keep any magic-using classes alive. However, that's pretty much all the barbarian is good for. Honestly, their proficiencies are pretty mediocre, and most barbarians aren't going to use their rages outside of combat. However, barbarians are good in combat, I will say that. As a barbarian, you do an average of 8 damage per turn at level 1 if you are using rage. That is from the extra rage damage and your great axe. Also, the stereotypical barbarian build just won't work for a lot of D&D parties, especially in modern games, because having a very low intelligence in D&D, especially in modern day, is very punishing towards your character. I would almost go as far to say that it is almost impossible to play a D&D character with a -3 modifier or below in intelligence. And now all of these problems that I've mentioned before are solved by a problematic player that is playing a barbarian. Also, barbarian as a class doing as much damage as possible kind of just encourages being a murder hobo. But at the same time, the rogue has that same problem along with the fighter. So that's not a unique problem with the class. That's more a problem with the players that are playing these classes. So I actually have a story now to tell you all kind of why I banned the barbarian. And we're going to call these two people Dumb and Dumber because their characters had very low intelligence stats. When I was in my freshman year of high school, 2 of my friends who also play D&D decided to invite me to the D&D club that our school is running at the time, and I will talk about that campaign in a different video because that campaign was a mess in general. It was the first campaign where I'd ever gotten to be a player instead of a dungeon master, so I kind of had no expectations and I kind of just went with the punches at the time. However, it turned out to be a very unfair and unbalanced campaign with several other problems. So after I had gotten out of that campaign, me and a few of my friends, along with a few friends of friends, decided to meet up at a card shop, and while we were all playing Magic the Gathering, we all got talking about D&D and how none of us were currently in a campaign. And we all made this split-second decision to start a campaign. I was the only one with DMing experience at the time, so I was coordinated as the Dungeon Master. And so we basically did an improv to session 0 at that time. Most people ended up rolling up simple martial classes like Fighter, Rogue. We had a Monk and a Bard. And then Dumb and Dumber decided to both roll up Barbarians. Now, Dumb and Dumber probably got into D&D a few months after me, so they are still good players. They just prefer to play non-magic using classes. So this campaign is going great up until around session 3. The first session had seen the group running away from a illusion of a dragon which was basically a conspiracy cover-up for a sorcerer casting fireball all over the city and doing other anarchist activities. Now, around the beginning of session 3, the party was in sort of a bunker/abandoned castle. They were trapped in there because rubble had fallen on the entrance, and so they had to find a way to get out. And so meanwhile, Dumb and Dumber are kind of just walking around, trying to find another way out. They're failing all of their investigations and perception checks because they have terrible stats in those areas. Fast forward about 5 more sessions, and I had gotten a text from Dumb and Dumber about 35 minutes before we were getting ready to run a session saying that they wouldn't be able to make it. And I was thinking in my mind, shit, I've already made this combat encounter of about 50 goblins and zombies that they all have to take on. Keep in mind, the party was level 5 at this point. So they cancel. I cut the combat encounter in half. So there's only, I think, 15 zombies and the rest of them were goblins. And throughout the entire combat encounter, I kept on rolling really high to hit the players. So they were constantly taking damage. It ended up in a TPK. They were able to take down about half the zombies before the goblin backup arrived. However, it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth for barbarians. So like I've said, this is mainly a problem whenever it comes to inexperienced players playing the barbarian. If you're an experienced player, and I've seen you play something before like a wizard or a cleric or even a paladin, ranger, rogue, something like that, then yeah, go ahead. Play a barbarian. You have my permission. But if this is your first time ever playing D&D, never play a barbarian.